Hello there, everyone, and welcome once again to our wonderful pod where pop culture meets PR. On this episode, listeners, Jackie and I will be discussing recent developments surrounding radio DJ Scott Mills. Now, for our international listeners who are not familiar with Scott Mills hosted BBC Radio 2's flagship breakfast show, has hosted the Eurovision Song Contest, and has been a mainstay of the BBC's radio and TV landscape for 3 decades. On Monday at 10 a.m, the BBC sent a memo to their staff that Mills had been sacked over allegations related to his personal conduct. The Mirror ran an exclusive on the story before that memo went out, and it has since emerged that these allegations pertain to alleged sexual offences against a teenage boy between 1997 and 2000. The former BBC Radio 2 and Radio 1 DJ was questioned in 2018 over the historical allegations of these serious sexual offences, but the investigation was closed in 2019 after the CPS deemed there was insufficient evidence to bring charges. The Met Police has now confirmed that the teenage boy at the centre of this investigation was under 16 at the time these offences are alleged to have taken place. Jackie, your thoughts, your takeaways on this seismic breaking news, because it has shocked people all over the UK and beyond, hasn't it?
Yes, and it shocked a lot of the people at the BBC itself, who had no idea of where this had come from. You know, it literally came right out of the blue. What's been interesting to me has been the focus of the media reports bouncing straight back to the BBC. Not a huge amount of intrusion into Scott Mills or question marks over his behaviour, but more about how the BBC is yet again the harbourer of people who do wrong by young people. The safe place for paedophiles is some of the criticism that has been levelled at the BBC. It's just another one, isn't it? After Jimmy Savile, Gregg Wallace, Jermain Jenas, it just appeared that especially during Tim Davies' reign, there seemed to be this slew of presenters being accused of bad behaviour, and that being a sort of very wide term. What's also been interesting to me has been how we've just almost become inured to these revelations, how we are not that surprised when we hear yet another one. Yes, we're shocked, it's Scott Mills, but it's another one. What do you think?
Well, this is very interesting, isn't it? And before we went live on this recording, we had a conversation, didn't we? You, me, and our producer Felix, and we spoke a bit about, I mean, the only word really for it is this fatigue that maybe the court of public opinion now feels over these revelations. And when we're delivered these stories, the level of shock perhaps we once felt has diluted somewhat, because to your point, Jackie, to use a phrase you've just used, it's just another one. And I then asked you the question, how you then communicate these stories, and how the media respond to these stories? How does that change? How has that changed now that we're almost a bit done with it and we sort of roll our eyes at these stories? Because when you first, Jimmy Savile as the example, when the Jimmy Savile story first broke, any amount of information we got to do with his historical, horrible, dreadful behaviour was met with equal amounts of shock, and it just caused shockwaves throughout. Now we get delivered these things and we're just desperate for more truth, desperate for more fact, because no amount of it being vague and it being about personal conduct is gonna transmit, is gonna hit us. So how has that changed? How has that landscape changed?
It was interesting to see how the BBC has handled it so quickly this time round. Scott Mills was last on the air last Tuesday, so almost a week before the news comes out. He didn't return to his breakfast show. It appears that when he signed off from his breakfast show, he said, "See you tomorrow," and he expected to be back on the Wednesday. And then the Wednesday came and he didn't appear, and he was replaced by another DJ. Nothing really was thought of that other than maybe he'd been off sick or whatever. But then when the Mirror broke its story, that's when the memo went round for the BBC, and then the BBC was in action very quickly. So you would imagine that they were waiting for the right time to send this memo out. And still, as you pointed out, Lyle, when we were talking before we came on air, still the BBC hasn't linked that Metropolitan Police revelation about the historical allegations against Scott Mills. Still, the BBC has not linked that and inked that to the reason why they sacked Scott Mills for his personal conduct. That was the moniker they put around it. And we were talking about potentially why they haven't given any more detail than this. But they moved very quickly when that exclusive came out to first tell the staff, which was the right thing to do. They sent the internal memo from Lorna Clark, who is the director of music at the BBC. So they moved quickly. So they were obviously ready to go as soon as that exclusive came out. So they've clearly learnt something from the previous debacles of communication and all of the grey spots and everything else. Another thing that we speculated on was, why haven't we had that linking? Why haven't we had more detail? We possibly speculated that because there's somebody else involved in this, the person who is the alleged victim, maybe that is the reason why the BBC aren't saying enough. But as we discussed, it is a publicly funded organisation. It is not a privately owned company. It's public company, and therefore it's public property. We are like shareholders, so we deserve to know more detail than what we're being given right now. And interestingly, I took a look at personnel today as well and saw a lot of personnel directors and their response to how the BBC had handled this. And they're all saying the speed at which the BBC has come out and told the staff and has made its statements is correct. But they also need to be a little bit more front and centre, because with British employment law, you cannot sack somebody immediately other than for gross misconduct. And even then, and I've gone through this myself, even then you need to go through an element of a disciplinary process with your staff member, with your employee, that gives them the right to reply and gives them the opportunity to state their side. Just like in a court of law, you're innocent until proven guilty. And even if all the facts stack up, you still have to have due process in order to be able to put your side across. So maybe that was the time between the Tuesday coming off air and the Monday revelation from the Mirror, when Scott Mills did get his opportunity to put his point across. They do have to go through due process. They do have to respect the confidentiality of all individuals involved. And we still don't know who all the individuals involved are, and we still don't know the exact reasons for the personal conduct that he was sacked for. And it could be even something as simple as you didn't reveal to us that you had been investigated. It could be as simple as that they had found out that in contract, it could be in his contract that says it's gross misconduct if you don't tell us if you've been investigated. Who knows? This is all speculation. But there are reasons why the BBC will not be telling us right now, but they will have to move quite quickly.
We just wanted to take this opportunity to say we absolutely love recording this content for you. So please do like, subscribe, and follow us wherever you get your podcasts. And please do head over to the brilliant platform that is Substack and search Where Pop Culture Meets PR. Subscribe to us there. It's free. There's some brilliant content going up there always. So please do get those comments in, subscribe, and join us over on Substack. Thank you so much and enjoy the rest of this episode. Quickly, they have moved in the sense that obviously the memo, as you quite rightly point out, went out to the staff. There's a lot of self-reporting going on because one of the wings of the BBC here in this country and indeed all over the world for our international listeners is there is a news branch. So I found that very interesting that obviously BBC News are themselves, as they have done in the past with past scandals, are reporting on Scott Mills themselves. And it was really interesting reading an article earlier. The BBC has approached the BBC for comment and all these sorts of things. Very, very interesting indeed. As far as the comms side of this goes, and a comms challenge, there are so many layers to this, aren't there? There's the speed with which personal conduct and that the heavy lifting that phrase is doing, the speed with which that's being communicated. There's the facts we know, which you've done brilliantly to point out, whereby an investigation began in 2016. He was questioned in 2018. The CPS dropped the case for lack of evidence in 2019. We know that the investigation pertains to offences that took place between 1997 and 2000. With all of these facts that we know, why do we not have, and we're being a bit speculative, why do we still have an element of uncertainty? Why is there still not that link being made? And what has been your response in light of that to how the media have then reported on this? Because they've obviously had to go with what they know. They can't completely jump to conclusions and things like that. They've had to report on the facts and the truth. So I suppose the first part of the question is why do we not have the full specifics yet, in your opinion?
In my opinion, the reason we don't have all of the facts, I think it comes down to the fact that there are other people involved in this and their privacy has to be respected as well. I would imagine that's the case. But it's interesting the facts we do have. Because fact number one is that this allegedly happened in 1997. That is a long, long time ago. It doesn't mean it wasn't equally bad then as it is now, but it is a long time ago for something to allegedly have happened. And again, although it's very dodgy and shonky, and we have seen this happen numerous times, he is still not he's not necessarily guilty of this. All of the stuff that's coming out may well point that way, but he has not been tried in court. He has not been investigated. There was not enough evidence in 2018, and that's why it was dropped in 2019. Now, who knows? Maybe that case is being reopened, and this is something that the BBC can't talk about. The Met Police came to the BBC and said, we are investigating Scott Mills again. Because when they close cases, it doesn't mean that they can't reopen them, especially if the victim had new evidence or who knows, or had decided that the victim had decided not to stand up and give evidence against Scott Mills. And there are all sorts of different things that could be going on that will out at the moment. But again, it's a long time ago. This happened when Scott Mills was 24 years old. And it happened, allegedly, before he joined the BBC. He joined the BBC when he was 25. And while these offences are alleged to have happened between 1997 and 2000, when Scott Mills joined the BBC, it was a completely different era. This was an era where when they signed their contracts, there weren't things like social media clauses, for example. The Jimmy Savile scandal had not happened or had not come out then. So there's a lot of learning that's happened since that time. I'm sure the BBC has redone its contracts with long-serving members of staff. But do you see where I'm going with this? In the passage of time and in the long time, the decades that Scott Mills has been working for the BBC, things have changed a lot and contracts have changed a lot. So there's that. So when Scott Mills was then investigated for what happened back when he was 24, when he was investigated in 2018, he was in his 40s. So, he's gone from a man in his 20s to being a man in his 40s. He was also in a relationship where he married in 2000 and he started his relationship with his boyfriend, Sam Vaughan, in 2017. So while this investigation was going on, he was in a full-on committed relationship with his boyfriend, who became his fiancé in 2021. They got married in 2024. They were together in a program, a very popular program, Race Across the World, as well as a couple. So we have seen Scott Mills grow up in front of our eyes on television in the BBC, and that is why it's a story that has been presented to us. But here's the interesting thing, and something that is really redolent of what happened with Philip Schofield, which was a massive story. Again, Philip Schofield was seen as a national treasure. He'd been a presenter of morning television on the BBC's greatest competitor station, ITV, and he'd been on our screens, similar to Scott Mills, more plus years. He was seen as a married man. He came out as a gay man, and he was brought down by his conduct as well, by his personal conduct with a younger man as well. Now that was a little bit more present in the present day, because this was a young man that he'd met when he was 15, introduced into ITV. He got him an interview at ITV, set him up, basically with a job on the same program that he worked on. And then later on, when he was in his 20s, this young man and Philip Schofield went on to have their own affair. But again, this is another incident of, unfortunately, a gay man having a gay affair with a younger man. But that is actually proven and did happen. With Scott Mills, this is not proven to have happened. It's not proven that these alleged offences did actually transpire. So we have to be quite careful with how we talk about this in terms of factual evidence and in terms of wrong and right. What we can talk about is how the media have responded to this and how we as a public are responding to this, and therefore how Scott Mills and the BBC should be responding to this as well as we move forward.
Before we go any further, we would just like to tell you about a brand new podcast from the creative minds behind Where Pop Culture Meets PR. By fans and for fans, Pod Round discovers and curates the best episodes from across YouTube, Spotify, Substack, and the whole pod landscape, and delivers the ones worth your time straight to you. Serving up different genres and different voices from different corners of the globe, Pod Round is the one-stop shop for podcast lovers. The first set of podcasts we'll be bringing you will all be about the royal family, so please do check Pod Round out, available wherever you get your podcasts. Thank you so much, and enjoy the rest of this episode. I'm pleased you brought the example of the Philip Schofield situation into this conversation as well, because we have spoken about previous scandals within the BBC, but I think you're right to bring up how this is very much a present day situation and how we've watched someone, as a general public, we've watched someone grow up. You're right to also bring the context into the Philip Schofield situation insofar as it was proven. And Philip Schofield, I believe it was within a week of him last hosting This Morning, he released his own statement where he confirmed his side of the story. And he was the one who came out to the media. This idea of it being fact, this idea of it being truth, and then Philip Schofield, the one being at the centre of it, and then the media taking that on and reporting it in a certain way. I think that word proof and that word fact is very, very important here and may serve to indicate, and this is the question, may serve to indicate why we haven't yet heard from Scott Mills, because these remain allegations. And to your point, he may not be guilty of these things, and there remains further investigating to be done if indeed that is the case. Obviously, the investigation officially was closed in 2019, as we've said. Does that serve to indicate why we haven't yet heard from the individual at the centre of these things? Would that be your advice to someone in this position? Because these remain allegations, because the BBC have already released their own statement and done their own work from a comms perspective, is it just keep yourself to yourself time for the person at the centre of this until such a time as it's appropriate and right for you to make your own statement? Do you see what I mean?
Absolutely. 100%. It's so important now for Scott Mills to surround himself with the right advice from a legal standpoint and from a communication standpoint. And those two teams or experts need to work together. What's actually happened is, if you look at the sequence of events, the story's broken by the Mirror. So it's out in the wild. The BBC have done their own comms equally out in the wild. And now the Met Police have come on board to say their facts. So they're asking us as a public to piece this together. Nobody has strung all these bits of information together. They're asking us to be the detectives. It's a classic tactic to get us all to piece it all together, to come to our conclusions before lobbing out the next fact. And this is the kind of media landscape that Scott Mills is going to be reacting to right now. And my advice is do not react. Wait to see how this all plays out, because we've seen people react and react well to things, and we've seen people react and react very badly to things. Somebody who reacted well to this was Jermain Jenas. Fell on his sword, went to the same newspaper that blew out his particular, this is another BBC presenter, sports presenter, who was doing it phenomenally well and was exposed for really bad behaviour with people of the opposite sex. And so there's a Sun newspaper that came out with the story in the exclusive, and Jermain Jenas went right back to the Sun newspaper, sat down with them, gave his side of the story, gave all the facts, fell on his sword, and was able to at least gain back a little bit of dignity and the ability to sail his own ship through the devastation that happened to his personal life as a result of all of that, and has managed subsequently to start to rebuild his career. And I think a lot of that was down to the expert advice that he got from both the lawyers, from his communications people, and also the grace that he was given by the Sun newspaper to use their platform to put his side of the story on. So that, to me, was a very well executed piece of communications around a personal scandal. But that came in a matter of time. And that was a very present day story. This story has more intricacy because it is historical. It is something that is yet to be actually aligned with his sacking, because we still don't know whether he was sacked because of it. And so there is a lot more that needs to be done behind the scenes to, as I always say in a crisis, gather all your information around you. And the BBC should be doing exactly the same thing. They should be gathering all their information around them, making sure their facts are right, making sure that they have gone back through history as well to check back on everything that they knew about Scott Mills when he was working for them. Did they know about the investigation in 2018? What was their response to it if they did, etc., etc., etc. Everybody should be gathering their information, and everybody should be thinking about their responsibility to their publics, or their first priorities first. So Scott Mills needs to be thinking about who is affected within his circle first before he takes a public message out. And I do think he will need to make a public statement at some stage, because he won't be left alone. But the way he does that and how he crafts that message has to be very carefully and seriously thought out for numerous reasons. One can be there may well be a court case that comes up. This case could be reopened. Whatever he says he'll be held to. He'll be held accountable to. So he has to be very clear. He also has to be very clear on his own particular value set, what he has always stood for, his own truth and his own authenticity. And I always advocate the truth. I say this constantly, and I know that truth is about perception as well, but truth is grounded in fact. And so he has to get his facts around him. But it is a really serious situation for him, and it is a monumental place that he sits in right now. That whatever decisions he takes right now will dictate the course of his personal life and his career moving forward. So caution, time taken is all really, really important. And we saw this blow up before for Gregg Wallace when he was accused of things, and he took to Instagram and he was like a man unleashed with no help and no, even murderers get lawyers to represent them. Even people who have committed the worst kind of offences have the right to legal representation and have people to advise them. You can't emphasize enough how important it is not to go rogue with your communications right now. This is a critical moment, which is why I wanted to come on air and talk about the importance of communications right now.
I'm glad we have done so, and I'm glad we've done so with this up-to-date story as well, and it's a constantly developing story, and that's where I'd like to bring it to a close, actually, if I may. We have mentioned the media throughout this episode. It's quite a simple question, unusually for me, I'm sure. What have you made of the media's reporting, the media's coverage, the timeliness of the media coverage, the media reporting, obviously particularly the Mirror running the exclusive, but obviously other papers have taken the story on, other news outlets have taken the story on. What have you, as someone with lots of experience in the communications industry, what have you made of the media's coverage of such a seismic story?
I think the media are piling on the BBC right now, and to be honest, it's to be understood and it is to be expected, and the BBC should have learnt enough from their vast experience of handling these situations to have this machine as a well-oiled machine by now. And to be honest, they will not be forgiven if they get it wrong again. Now, it's quite interesting. The chairman of the BBC, Felix, please, our lovely producer, would you please look up the name of the chairman of the BBC? He recently did a speech where he said there will be that it is like no get out of jail free card. There's going to be no understanding of any kind of misconduct of this nature ever again. He literally went out and said this in front of everybody after the recent spates of bad behaviour. And this may be why they have taken the decision they've taken to act quickly, sack Scott Mills for gross misconduct, as their contract with him will have let them do. There is no doubt in my mind that they will have found something in his contract that they can sack him for gross misconduct for. Whether that is linked to these allegations that were closed down in 2019, we are yet to find out. But it's an interesting media landscape where nobody has officially linked the two yet.
Very, very interesting indeed. I've got here that Dr. Samir Shah, CBE, is the current chairman of the BBC. So there you go. My own research there, doing my own digging. But yeah, no, you're right to bring that up. And I certainly think it's going to be an interesting story to watch, both from the epicenter of the story when it comes to Scott Mills and the BBC, but also, and I know you, our brilliant listeners, will be keeping an eye on this as well, the media coverage and the media reporting, as we've touched on there just towards the end of this episode. What do you think? What do you make of these allegations that have come to light? What have you made of the BBC's response? At time of recording, we've had no response from Scott Mills. We've had no statement, as we said, from Scott Mills, but we have had lots of reporting in the media. What have you made of that as well? Please do keep those comments coming in. We do really enjoy reading them, as always. Wherever you get your podcasts, please do head to our Substack as well. Get those comments coming in on our Substack. We really, really appreciate that. Just search Where Pop Culture Meets PR, subscribe, and get those comments in. Thank you so much for joining us on this, the latest episode of Where Pop Culture Meets PR. From Jackie and from myself, take care of yourselves. It's bye for now.